evening, everyone. I call this October 9th, 2025 Water and Sewer Advisory Committee meeting to order. Wally, do we have a quorum?
We do.
Has everyone had a chance to review the agenda?
Yes.
Are there any questions? All right. Hearing none, I will accept a motion to adopt the agenda.
I'll make a motion. Second.
Agenda adopted. All in favor say aye by...
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries. Agenda has been adopted. Has everyone had a chance to review the minutes for our last meeting? Any corrections or omissions? Hearing none, I'll accept a motion to accept the minutes as written.
I'll make a motion to accept minutes. Second.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries, and the minutes have been approved. Well, I guess I'm handing it over to you now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. The next two meetings will discuss the capital improvement plan. As you'll remember, we shifted, last year we started with a shift to start our capital improvement plan planning earlier in the fiscal year because it is such a large part of the budget. That way the idea is to have a good draft presented to council in December in order for finance to start building the base budget for the next fiscal year. So, which that would be fiscal year 27. So over the next two meetings, we'll really talk about what is the meat and potatoes of the capital improvement plan at the next meeting, which may be your December meeting because we don't have a November meeting because of the timeline. We will have the actual document for you ready for full review. And then following that timeline, we usually don't ask you for your support until typically the February, March timeframe. After we've run the rate model, we'll kind of bring it back to you again, talk about any changes we needed to change if there were any from the rate model discussions that we had, and then ask you for support at that time. And of course, it's not actually approved and adopted until the budget is adopted, and typically that happens in the late May, early June timeframe. So we do have plenty of time, but we need to get started because we do need to get really that capital improvement plan underway and get those projects identified. So what we wanted to do tonight is kind of go through, I know we do this almost every year, but we're going to do it anyway because it's a good reminder. It even helps us as staff talk about what the capital improvement plan is, what constitutes an eligible project, and then we'll talk about the new projects that we have proposed for the incoming CIP. The other projects, would carry over, although there may be some scope changes, money changes, or anything like that, we will talk about at the next meeting. Tonight, we wanted to highlight and talk individually about new projects proposed for the 10-year window. So what we'll do is we'll just start with an overview. This is the capital improvement plan. This is the one from 25 through 34. It was a great cover, so I just used the cover. Of course, that was 2 years ago, so we'll actually be working on the 27 through 36 capital improvement plan with what we're talking about tonight. But the capital improvement plan does provide for a 10-year horizon. It shows project cost estimates, and it shows in particular in the past, we've really focused on the funding of those projects, and we'll talk about that a little more in a few minutes. It identifies the funding sources, so whether it's water and sewer fund, which are the projects you talk about, the general fund, which is ad valorem taxes, grants, or We also have stormwater funds, and we have reserve funds that all go into making up the funding mechanism for the capital improvement plan. And then it basically evaluates and prioritizes projects, and it schedules projects. Historically, we really focused on the scheduling of the funding of those projects because North Carolina requires that when you sign a contract for the execution of a project, the value of that project, the value of that contract has to be encumbered. So that's really where the focus of that funding, the revenue source is for that project. We've put less focus on the expenditures, trying to project when we'll spend the money, because the money sits in a project and it's reserved until you finalize the project and close it out, or until the city decides, we're going to go a different direction and move that money out or whatever, we cancel the project, which that doesn't happen very often, but typically it sits there until you finalize the project. The projects that are eligible to be in the capital improvement plan are really those designed to add some sort of capital improvement, whether that be a building or a pump station or a new pipe, or rehabilitate a pipe or a pump station or a building to where it adds to the useful life of that, that asset. They typically, or they need to cost $50,000 or more. They have to have a useful life of roughly 5 or over 5 years. But typically that's not a problem because if it's an infrastructure project, we're really talking of a 50-year useful life, or, maybe a station might be in the 30-year useful life category. And then, as you know, we use it in the water and sewer rate model to project when we will need rate increases, or if we will need additional rate increases, or maybe if we can avoid a rate increase. The only year that's funded is the active year. So in this case, the active year will be the first year, which will be fiscal year 27. I know we're early, but that means July 1st of 2026 to June 30 of 2027. So that's the year that we're really talking about that will be funded. And then after that first year, those are really those planning years. And we put more focus on the projects that are kind of in the first 5 years of the CIP. While we do try our best at estimating or prioritizing those projects in the second half, the 5 to 10 year mark, my crystal ball and those of my staff are only so good. We're basing it on where we're seeing growth, or where we've talked to developers, or where our models are showing that we have infrastructure that needs to be upgraded, or where our maintenance programs are showing that we're spending a lot of staff time or funding to make repairs. And I'll talk about one of those in just a minute, because those can impact the priority of a project pretty significantly. So this year in programming the CIP, the capital improvement plan, what we started with was kind of looking at evaluating our project timelines. Like I talked about earlier, we really do a good job of saying when we will start a project. We'll start design, we'll start construction, but we've put less focus on when the expenditures would happen. Whether a great example would be, there was one case where we had like a $3 or $5 million project, and it was shown all in 1 year. Well, as you know, there's no way to design, bid, build that large of a project in 1 year. If we could do that, we wouldn't be here, So we would pretty much go anywhere we wanted to go, right?
For sure.
So, but when you talk about funding, that's how it's funded. right? So if we're going to start the design in a year, and in that year, that design is less than 12 months to complete and get permitted, which is now becoming more difficult, and I'll talk about that in a minute too, then you would need all of the money in that first year. Now, you wouldn't expend it until, you start building out that project. But in order to sign the design contract, you have to have all the money. And then in order to sign the construction contract, you have to have all the money per North Carolina law. So it is possible for all of the revenue or the funding source to be in 1 year. And we really focused on that. But what we need to do now in getting better is coming back and really trying to find that, what those expenditures should look like. And the larger the project, the harder that is to do. If it's got permitting or right-of-way or easements involved, it gets even more difficult. But we really need to try to spread those project timelines out and show when those expenditures are more likely to occur. And that's just, that continuous process of getting better. One of the things that we're really looking at now is analyzing the impact of increased construction costs. Across the water and sewer industry, costs have fluctuated significantly in the last 5 years. But if you go back 5 years, costs have increased in some cases 25 to 30%. And in some cases, which this isn't construction costs, but our chemicals, some of our chemicals have increased over that same time period 60%. So it gets really tough when you're talking about a 10-year document to plan out the impacts. But one of the things that we found is that even though in some years we've gone through and tried to revise some of those nearer term projects, we've recently done 3 projects, and all 3 projects needed money. Of course, the largest one we talked about was the Western Regional Pump Station, which was significantly over what even the design engineer had estimated. And we talked about multiple reasons for that, but we just did a pump station where we had really good participation in bidding that pump station. I think we had 4 bidders. The lowest was within 4 or 5% of what we had available for that project, but they were still over. But the highest was double what we had available. So there was a real wide range there. The good thing is we got a good competitive bid from a reputable contractor that we can move forward with, but that's part of the challenge when you're trying to plan projects. In this case, we are a minimum of 6 or 8 months from starting the design of some of these, and maybe a year to 2 years to 3 years from starting the construction. So those are things that we're trying to work through, but we also recognize we can't just afford to go increase our CIP 25% all the way through, nor is that really realistic. Right? It's not every project. So it's trying to come back and look at those projects that may have special circumstances or may not be as straightforward, or maybe we can look for other ways for economies of scale. We're pretty good about breaking projects apart and phasing them to help spread out some of those expenses. So those are all things that go into trying to program the CIP.
I'm sorry, do you get grants for a lot of these projects?
We only have a few grants. We are kind of in a tough situation when it comes to grants for water and sewer projects, because it's fairly easy for smaller municipalities to get grants. But once you get over a certain size, it's very difficult for municipalities and water purveyors to get grants because we are rate funded. That said, Senator Lazaro was very instrumental in bringing us $23 million that was very helpful. And in the time that I have, we were talking about this earlier, but I've been involved in the engineering piece and the infrastructure for the city for since 2006. I think you could probably name on one hand the number of grants we've gotten in that time period. We got, the American Reinvestment Act. We got a low interest loan for 50%, and then what they call principal forgiveness. Wasn't called a grant, but it was called principal forgiveness for the other half. And then we got the money from Senator Lazaro. We got another grant for coming out of COVID. I don't remember what that was called. So, I mean, we're at 5 or 6 total grants over that time period. It's not that we don't look. It's not that we don't try. We're just not eligible for a lot of them. And we're kind of stuck because we're population-wise, we're in that 80,000 range. But if you look at connection rise, we're really in the 20,000 range, or I guess 19,000 if you look at your WASAC report from this month. I think we're hovering around 18,000 active accounts or 18.5 active accounts and maybe 500 or so. I hadn't looked at it in a little while, but maybe 500 or so inactive accounts. So we're hovering around that 19,000, 20,000 mark for accounts. So it really puts us in a tough spot when we're going to apply for grants. So long-winded answer to say we try, but they're not always available.
Okay. I know that those from the last class that we got, brief we got from you, that you get a grant, there's time restrictions and there's a lot of restrictions to that money. As you were saying earlier, that we can put this here, put that there. But with a grant, you have to use it now for this at this time.
And a lot of grants come with stipulations that drive the cost up.
Yeah.
I hate to say it, but free money is not free. If we get a federal grant, it probably drives the cost of the project up 10%. So just from the stipulations.
Why is that so?
Because they have specific requirements that you have to meet. An easy one that everybody points at is Davis-Bacon. The Davis-Bacon Act says basically the contractor and all the subs agree that they will pay fair labor wages. So they have to sign all these documents saying that. Then they have to track every single one of their employees, every single one of the subs employees, along with their identifying like social security numbers, and show the wages that they actually pay. And then on top of that, we as a city have to go interview and talk to the workers to make sure that that worker is identified and that they're making the wage that they have stated. So when you start talking about, I think some contractors would call that a headache factor. So that goes into the price. It takes them time, it takes them energy, it takes us time, it takes us energy, and it just adds to the cost of the project. Now, it's still additional money that we wouldn't have had otherwise, and in most cases, it's still well worth it, so we do it. But it does increase the cost of projects. And then, one of the things that we're in a unique scenario right now, we're in the process of redoing our water and sewer system models. So they're building the base model right now, making sure that all of our connections are shown, all of our pipes are shown. Then they'll calibrate it, make sure that the model acts just like the water system does. And we'll use flow rates, pressure monitors in the system, and we'll make changes, change pumps, change wells to make sure that, and then we'll model that. We'll do the, make sure the model does the exact things that we're implementing in the field. And when we calibrate that model, then we can start to add projects in and look at the impact on our system, or look where we have deficits and need to maybe change the scope of a project. So in the next year or two, the next round of CIP review, you may see some changes to some of the projects based on that modeling. And then lastly, as we've always talked about, we use the CIP to generate the water and sewer rate model. So what we'll do is jump into the new projects that are proposed for the CIP. As I mentioned, we're in a unique year. because we have the water and sewer model and master plan going on right now. And we're too early to say what the projects we have in the CIP does to that model, or whether they're all needed at the level they're shown, or if they're needed at a different level, or maybe there are other ways to serve certain areas, because it does look at growth and build out of the city for the future as well. So what we've stuck to this year is you'll see that there's less projects proposed across the 10 years. And that's for a couple of reasons. The projects you'll see tonight are either we really need them, and we'll explain why, or they're reoccurring programs that year the program is just coming into the funding window. But we really didn't want to propose a whole bunch of new projects or make significant changes to scopes of projects before we get our water and sewer rate model completed, which that is about an 18-month process, and we're probably about 6 months into it. So we may be looking at some of that over the next round of CIP. So when we're discussing this next year, we may have some better idea of what some of those projects should look like. So with that, what we'll do is we'll jump in. This is the pipe barn enclosure at our utilities maintenance area. We've looked at this once or twice before, and it's one of those things that it's important, but other things get in the way. So it keeps either getting pushed out or we choose a project instead. But this project, we're at a point we kind of really need to move forward. What you see is we store our PVC under this pipe barn. That's what it was intended for. It's got shelving built in where we can stack so we can get more in there. The big problem is it does have a shelter over it, but it's still exposed on every side to weather. The biggest problem is UV is the fastest deteriorator of, if that's a word, it leads to the fastest deterioration of PVC. So that's why you see that some of that pipe looks faded. It's strictly from UV. So a pipe will last a whole lot longer in the ground full of water than it will sitting dry on a shelf exposed in the sun. So really what we're asking to do is enclose the sides of this just to keep that UV off and to shade our materials. You know, some of that, sometimes we roll through material pretty quickly, sometimes we don't, but we have to keep a certain number of sizes on hand in order to be able to make repairs. The second project that we're adding is the Highway 24 sewer main rehabilitation. If you recall, we did this to the section of sewer main between the bypass in front of Lejeune Memorial Gardens, kind of up to Sonic, this past year. And we actually did that portion using the inflow and infiltration program to line that. But remember, we had a sewer spill because it's reinforced concrete pipe, and the hydrogen sulfide gas had degraded that pipe so much that the gaskets actually fell into the flow line. We had to go in, cut the gaskets, and then line the pipe. And if you recall, lining a pipe basically is putting a fiberglass liner inside the pipe and curing it. So you're building a pipe within the pipe. So this is the section from where the pedestrian bridge is over 24, headed toward Tarawa Terrace, TT2. And if you recall, right at the beginning of the summer, there was a lane closed. I think I actually briefed this in the open discussion at a previous meeting. But that's a picture of the point repair we had to do where the pipe failed and Highway 24 sank coming off of the Wilson Gate exit, headed, I guess that would be east, toward Swansboro. So we need to do the same thing with this, cut those rings, come through, line that pipe. It'll require bypass pumping, and it will be a major project. Some of the reason, that number is fairly low for this type of project, but we put the bypass piping in place. Some of it had to be buried because of where it's located, so we left it in place. So we will be doing the bypass pumping to offset some of the costs. So this cost is strictly for the contractor to come in, clean, line, and leave. We'll handle all the rest.
Where does that flow come from and go?
So the flow actually comes from Corbin Street. There's a manhole on the base side of where Corbin Street comes out, and it flows from there all the way down to just past the Wilson Gate, and it comes under 24 and goes to the Ellis Pump Station at Hardison Hills. And then from there, there's a force main from Ellis that pumps it up to the overpass over 24 and into a gravity sewer that runs in front of Lejeune Memorial Gardens. So there's not gravity sewer between the Wilson Gate and the bypass right there at Lejeune, or the overpass right at Lejeune Memorial Gardens. There's no gravity sewer there. It's connected by force main. But this section comes all the way from Tarawa Terrace, the entrance to Tarawa Terrace, all the way down 24, right? And it's right on the outside lane. And it comes under right past the pedestrian bridge.
So is this the only sections on that side of the road?
This
that
is.
Need fixed, that'll be the last one?
Yeah, hopefully this will be the last one. I don't know if we'll be able to get that whole segment. I think we're doing the worst part of this segment with this. We may have to come back and because we're only bypassing, we can't bypass the whole thing. So we're only bypassing, probably 1,000 feet or 1,500 feet. So there's still going to be more that we have to do on the other end. Now, I will say some of the other end has been done already because I did it back in the 2009 or 10 timeframe. But there still may be a gap, kind of the intersection of Western and 24 and back toward TT a little bit. And the sewer that comes through, there's about 1.1 million gallons a day of sewer that comes through this line. It's the whole Bryn Mawr area because it goes to the Bryn Mawr pump station, which is at East Creek. So that force main comes all the way down Corbin Street and ties in on the base side of Corbin at that intersection. So this is a major run of sewer. So that's a very important project. As I said, the others are kind of programs that we have in place. We have 46 wastewater pump stations, and we're programming to do basically rehab of those stations. So we look at the structure. If there is a structure at the station, some of our stations don't have structures, above ground structures, but we look at the structure, see if there's anything that needs to be done to the structure. We look at the electrical, we look at the generator. If there's not a generator, we evaluate putting a generator. And we look at the wet wells to see if anything needs to be done in the wet well, like coating or patching, replacing pump rails because those are metal and they deteriorate over time. Wiring in the station, electrical components in the station because those also deteriorate over time. So the purpose of this is to keep those stations on a rotation so that we don't let them get to a point where they would fail. So this is trying to be proactive instead of reactive. However, we have these programmed every 2 years or 3 years?
3 years, or no, 2 years for these.
So every 2 years, but 46 stations. So if you do the math, we still have to do things in between. So, but at least we have a program. Whereas, 5 years ago, we didn't have a program to do this. So we will continue with that program. Also, as part of a program, we have infrastructure rehabilitation. This is water and sewer. Projects that we've used this money for include projects like Brookview Drive, where we did the water and the sewer on Brookview Drive, Seminole Trail, Sioux Drive. Matter of fact, the bottom picture that looks like a pipe is actually a brick manhole that we took out of Sioux Drive. If you'll notice, there's something missing there. There's no bottom. The manhole, the bottom of the manhole was dirt. So there was no bottom under that manhole. So I'm not sure where it went. I'm sure I had one when it was, constructed originally. But, we have infrastructure that has to be replaced. We use our work order system to try to evaluate where these areas are located. And then based on that, we will come back and program this money appropriately. So the $85,000 is probably, while I don't have the project in front of me, we would probably see that that's the design for what that next project will be. And then when we roll into the next year, you would see the construction come into the window. So you're just seeing the first piece of that window. But again, this is one of those reoccurring programs to identify deteriorating infrastructure and replace it.
Well, doesn't the camera program identify those kind of?
It does, significantly helps, yes. And then the other program that we have coming in is the well rehabilitation, similar to the pump stations. We have wells on the clean water drinking side. We have 35 well sites. Many of those, all of the Black Creek wells, which are at least half of those 35, were constructed in the 60s and 70s. So those will be our higher priority sites. So we will go through, and again, we evaluate the structure, we evaluate the piping, we evaluate the pump, the controls, and we upgrade anything, the roofing, because a lot of these do have roofs, so we'll redo the roofs if necessary. So again, this is a 3-year program, and this is just coming into that window.
This has to withstand all the destructive weather.
It does.
And all that.
And some of these have generators and some of them do not. It depends on their importance, their location, and how much water they produce. So some of the challenges that we're facing with this year's CIP, we've talked about this a little bit, but we have definitely seen cost escalation over the last few years. So we will be going through and evaluating some of these projects. Like I said, we're really going to focus more in the first, year to 5 years, because only the first year is funded. But it's important to try to get as accurately as possible, because that's what our rate model is built on. So we want to be careful about overinflating, because that has an effect on the rate. And we want to be careful about being too low, because again, that could have an impact on the rate. So it's really trying to find that balance. So we'll spend some time focusing on how we evaluate the cost of the projects that we already have, and what that escalation should be. State permitting is one of the challenges that we're currently facing. Anything we do water and sewer requires a permit from the state. So if it's on water, it's got to be submitted for a water permit. If it's on the sewer side, it's got to be submitted for a sewer permit. The only thing that we don't have to permit is basically repairs, where we go in and we cut a short section of pipe and replace it with, a short section of pipe. because it's a repair. We're not changing anything. So the problem we're having is we're submitting and we're seeing a minimum of 4 months before we even get a comment back. And then we submit and we wait again. So that really is, when you're talking about that's a third of a year. So when you're talking about the impact on trying to program and schedule projects, building in appropriate permitting windows is critical. And the larger the project, the larger the permitting challenge.
Do they charge you for that?
They do. They do. And on the stormwater side, they have what they call a general permit that you submit for, or they have the express review. And you don't even get looked at if you don't pay for the express review. And it still is several months out. So it is a real challenge right now. And then, of course, I shared with you, we're really good about programming when we would get construction started on something. We were less focused on the expenditures. Roy and I are working together to try to go back and look at those projects. And I have to be honest, sometimes it's a best guess scenario. We think a project's going to generally take us, if you say a project could take a 24-month construction, the problem is that could be 3 fiscal years, depending on when it starts. So if it starts over midway through the first fiscal year, now you got funding in the first fiscal year, funding in the next fiscal year, and funding in the third fiscal year. And then if you're trying to wrap up a project or you're dealing with permits, you could roll into a fourth fiscal year. So we are trying to come through and evaluate that and get those more in line with what we expect. And then, a project, when you're talking about project expenditures, a project does follow a bell-shaped curve. You got lower expenditures up front in the project, and then as you get through the core of the project, you really that's where your largest expenditures are. And then as you're closing out a project, your expenditures are kind of lower also. So, when you see our funding, you'll see that they kind of follow that bell-shaped curve. So the larger expenditures will be in the year where you have a full year, and you'll have smaller expenditures in a year where you're only working in partial year, or where we think we're wrapping a project up or something like that. And then lastly, the one that is really hard to get our hands around is material and contractor availability. It seems to change based on the project, based on the material, but we still can never predict what we can get and what we can't. One example I'll give you is we have a failure at LTS right now on a 36-inch ductile iron pipe. And we have been chasing that one piece of pipe, one stick, 20 foot long, 30-inch ductile iron. It has to be coated. I think we've been chasing it for 2 months. It's been 2 full months.
Yeah.
So it has been, and I think we tracked down 2 sticks. One was in Ohio, and one was in,
I don't know where the second one was.
it was on the east, I don't think it was New York, New Jersey or somewhere. It was on the eastern seaboard north of us, right? So we're going to buy both sticks so that we have them. But again, trying to find one stick of pipe has really been a challenge. So we just don't know what we'll run into material-wise. And then, like I said, contractors on certain, on our wastewater pump station that we did, which was a major project, ended up being a $20 million project. We have 1 bidder. We only had 2 plan holders total, but we bid it twice and only 1 bidder both times. And when we talked to others, they basically told us they wouldn't bid anyway. So that's one of the reasons we moved forward. But then on the last projects we did, we had 4. So we had a much better range of projects, or bidders. So some of it just depends on the type of work, some of it depends on the availability, and some of it depends on what those contractors have going or on the books at the moment.
And considerations with storing that particular pipe.
Yes, that's
Why
a
we need
challenge
pole
too.
barn
Yes.
Enclosure.
Yeah, the pipe that what Derek's referring to is the pipe that we just purchased has an epoxy liner. And anybody that's dealt with epoxy, you know, UV is horrible on epoxy. So that pipe can't sit exposed in the sun. So the good thing is it's at least on the inside. So we talked about maybe we can cap it, maybe fill it with water or something like that to help. But you know, I've even joked maybe we just bury it, you know, protect it. But
Oh, you don't have no warehouse around here that at the end of the River Walk over there, you got that big old building over there, you can put things like that in there?
we don't have anything that would store that. Yeah, that is used. It's used for. I think that's used for Christmas decorations and mowing and stuff. But so those are our biggest challenges. I know you've seen this slide before, but this is our overall CIP timeline. You know, we did the new projects, which I think, I didn't count them, but there's maybe 5 projects there for water and sewer over the total 10 years that are new. We will bring to you the full CIP, the full water and sewer CIP at your next meeting, which will be in December. We'll also have that ready for council in December with likely a presentation, which would be, I think they would be the week following you because it would be their second meeting in December. And then we'll look at a rate model presentation somewhere in January or February for both you and council. And then again, CIP approval, we'll probably look for some sort of, either when we give you the rate model presentation, your support, or if we need to make some adjustments, your support after that. But again, approval is not till that May to early June timeframe with the budget. So with that, that's all I have.
I got one little quick question.
Go for it.
This is, you know, it's a laughable question, so y'all can laugh at it if you want to. Since, you know, I know the cost of materials went up drastically, you know, when COVID hit, has any of that come down at all, or is it still rising?
I don't think it's rising at the rate it was.
Right.
There were times where we saw double-digit increases in rise. And I want to say, I actually think the last quarter it was low, like 1 or 2%. I don't follow it as closely. You know, I start looking when we have something coming out or something that we're doing, or like the CIP, I'll go look at it. But I haven't really done that recently. I do try and track it. And they do have, you can find it for the water and sewer industry though. And typically, because it's a specialized industry with it's like marine, right? Anybody that's into boating, you know, you're going to pay more for something that goes on your boat than the same part that goes on your car, like a radio. You know, if you buy a marine radio, it automatically costs more than a radio that goes in a car. So it's the same thing for the water and sewer industry. A lot of specialized equipment, coated equipment, so that it lasts longer, those kind of things.
Okay, I'm done.
It's a great question.
And I'm sure once you talk about a project that costs so many millions, or all the expenditures and permits and all that, it's figured into that cost analysis, right?
It is,
And
yes,
then that
sir.
way, whatever costs more would be something, if they encounter something or find something that's broken, will raise the price up a little bit more than that.
And we try to build a little bit of contingency into the project. Typically, if it's a project that's being awarded, we look to have like somewhere between 2.5% and 5% contingency. So that's in the project, but it's not encumbered, which means we can't spend it without approval. But you know, that's for a great example of that would be like when we were digging in Newbridge Street, you just never know what kind of soils you're going to run into. So we used a lot of our contingency for Newbridge just in new dirt, you know, taking the dirt that was in there, hauling it off and bringing new dirt in. So we do build contingency into a project. And if you look in the CIP, we add contingency to the projects. A lot of engineers and rate forecasters use 20% before a project is bid. I don't think we use that much, but we do have some in there.
Thanks.
That's all I have for this.
Thanks, Wally, we appreciate that, all that information. Does anyone have any questions or additional issues we need to address?
We don't really have any open discussion. What I'll share is, I'm sure everybody's paying attention to the weather. We have a nor'easter coming, and we have king tide also. Hoping with the direction of our river, maybe those don't work in concert with each other. Hopefully they'll be somewhat opposing, but that is something that we're monitoring because heavy rainfall, significantly higher tides than normal could lead us to some flooding in areas that we typically see flooding in. The good thing for us is typically those don't lead, they're more of street flooding, time delays, nuisance flooding, not necessarily property damage flooding. But we are prepared if that happens. And of course, when that happens, flow significantly increases in our wastewater system.
Anyone have any other comments, questions, discussion? All right, well, our next meeting is scheduled for 5:30 on December 11th, 2025. There's no other business. I'll accept a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Meeting adjourned.
Thank you.